Okay, everyone, we are about to get started. First of all, thank you for joining Debbie's Dream. Give me one moment. Okay. Thank you for joining Debbie's Dream Foundation Curing Stomach Cancer training webinar for our 2021 Capitol Hill Advocacy Day. I am Nicole Berngard, the Events Director for DDF, and I will be moderating today's webinar. In a moment, we will be joined by Camille Banta, and our advocacy consultant, who will conduct the advocacy training along with her partner, Megan Dunn. You will be able to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can type your question into the box on the right that says questions. At the conclusion of the presentation, Camille will address questions as time allows. If we are unable to answer all of your questions during the time allotted, we will respond in an email to all advocates. In addition, the recording of this webinar will be accessible to all Advocacy Day advocates on our webpage. I would like to welcome all of you to Advocacy Day training webinar. Debbie's Dream Foundation is dedicated to raising awareness about stomach cancer, advancing funding for research, and providing education and support internationally to patients, families, and caregivers. Our ultimate goal is to make the cure for stomach cancer a reality. You can learn more by visiting our website at www.debbiesdream.org. In a few short years, DDF has achieved many great milestones. We have 35 chapters across the U.S., as well as chapters in Canada and Germany, and events ongoing around the country. We host events all over the United States, and our patient resource education program helps patients, their families, and caregivers around the world by matching them with survivors, caregivers, and caregivers using disease-specific criteria, including stages, biomarkers, and geographic locations. We host educational webinars and symposia year-round. And our website contains in-depth information about stomach cancer that can be translated into more than 60 languages. We also have provided over $1 million in research grants to date. Over the years, hundreds of DDF stomach cancer advocates have traveled to Capitol Hill to ask Congress to invest more federal resources in stomach cancer research. Specifically, Congress was asked to include stomach cancer among those cancers eligible for research funding under the Department of Defense's Peer Review Cancer Research Program, or as we call it, the PRCRP, and we won. The results of the fiscal year is nearly $5.8 million was awarded to stomach cancer researchers in 2015, which would have not happened without DDF advocates on Capitol Hill meeting with their members of Congress. There is still so much to be done. We cannot become complacent, which is why your participation in our 2021 Advocacy Day is so important. Your participation can help change the course of stomach cancer research in this country. I would like to now turn the presentation over to Camille Banta from Summit Consulting, who will provide us with more information about the Advocacy Day event.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and I want to thank everyone for being on today's virtual Advocacy Day training webinar. And I'm so excited by the number of you who are participating in our advocacy efforts for the first time. And I'm really happy to see so many of our seasoned advocates returning again this year. I know nothing beats being in a room together in Washington for this training, but work continues in Washington, COVID or not, and so we need to continue our advocacy efforts. Next slide, please. During today's webinar and training, we are going to help you to understand the role of the peer-reviewed cancer research program, as well as the National Cancer Institute in funding stomach cancer research. And we're going to help you recognize the link between advocacy and stomach cancer research. And importantly, we're going to give you the tools to effectively deliver your messages to your members of Congress. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna give you some background on stomach cancer. I'm gonna give you background on the peer-reviewed cancer research program and the National Cancer Institute, and then I'm gonna turn the training over to my colleague Megan Gordon-Don, and she's going to deliver a fantastic presentation on how to effectively advocate. And what you're going to learn from Megan is that the most important part of your meeting with congressional offices is sharing your story. But it's good to have a few facts and figures to help make a persuasive case for what you want your members of Congress to do for you. So that's where we're going to start. So I'm going to share with you a few stomach cancer facts and figures. And this data comes from the American Cancer Society, which is released annually. And it's estimated that this year more than 26,000 Americans will be diagnosed with stomach cancer, and nearly 11,000 will die from the disease. And as you know all too well, most patients are asymptomatic during the early stages of stomach cancer, which ultimately leads to a late diagnosis. And at an advanced cancer stage, the 5-year survival rate for stomach cancer is just 6%. Next slide, please. So in these tables, what you'll see is a pretty dramatic decline over the past 85 years in stomach cancer incidence and death. And this decline in stomach cancer is associated with a decline in the prevalence of H. pylori. And H. pylori is one of the leading risk factors and causes of stomach cancer. And I think that we may have lost the slide view on our screen, but I'll go ahead and keep talking. But for those of you who have stomach cancer, or maybe you have lost someone to the disease, really this decline in incidence and mortality means nothing to you. This is where your story matters, and you should be prepared to talk about the prevalence of the disease and the mortality associated with it, but most importantly, to share your story. I also want to point out that based on data from the North American Association of Central Cancer Tumor Registries, that it's predicted by 2030 that the overall incidence in non-cardia gastric cancer will no longer be decreasing, and that also cardia stomach cancer, which was once quite uncommon, has risen in incidence over recent decades. And it's really not important for you to be able to distinguish for the congressional offices that you're talking to about the differences between non-cardia and cardia stomach cancer. This is really important for epidemiologists and for researchers who are studying stomach cancer. But it is important for you to know and to be able to explain that the trends in stomach cancer incidence and mortality are changing, and that we really don't understand why. And this is why more funding from the federal government for stomach cancer research is really important. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So our primary request when we're on the Hill is going to be to ask members of Congress to continue to include stomach cancer in the Department of Defense's peer-reviewed cancer research program. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about what the peer-reviewed cancer research program is and what it does. So next slide, please. So the vision of the program is to help transform healthcare for service members and the public through innovative and impactful research. Next slide, please. The program also engages the community through its review process. And as some of you may know, after stomach cancer was included in the program, Debbie Zellman and Brandy Carasso served in the important roles of reviewers for research applicants. Next slide, please. So the peer-reviewed cancer research program was created in 2009. And it supports research into cancers that are specifically designated by Congress. Military health is a priority, as well as environmental exposures and risks for military service members. And they also look at mission readiness when determining what type of research is going to be funded through this program. And when the Department of Defense thinks about mission readiness, it's also thinking about the health of family members of service members, because if a family member gets ill or has cancer or stomach cancer, it really affects the ability of that service member to serve. As I said before, this program is run through the Department of Defense under a bigger umbrella of the congressionally directed medical research programs. And it's Congress's job to decide every year what gets included in the program. And this is why it's so absolutely important for stomach cancer advocates to come to Capitol Hill or participate virtually every year to defend stomach cancer's inclusion in the program. Now, sometimes you will have congressional staff ask you why the peer-reviewed cancer research program is needed when the National Institutes of Health is conducting research. And it's really important to understand that the peer-reviewed cancer research program complements research that's being done at the NIH. And it gives researchers an avenue to pursue under-researched cancers and to really create a community of researchers in areas where the science is immature. Next slide, please. Now, thanks to advocacy over the past few years, there has been a significant increase in the amount of funding appropriated by Congress for the peer-reviewed cancer research program. And in fact, as you can see here, the budget for the program has grown to $115 million. I mean, if you go back and look at 2013, that program was just funded at $15 million. And so thanks to our collective efforts, stomach cancer was first included in the program for the first time in fiscal year 2015. And thanks to the hard work of Debbie's Dream Foundation advocates, that stomach cancer has remained eligible in the program ever since. And to date, more than $22 million has gone to stomach cancer research through this program, and we know that grant announcements for fiscal year 2020 will be released soon, and hopefully we'll see an uptick in the amount of funding that is going to stomach cancer research. Next slide, please. So this pie chart here shows you just how significant the funding that stomach cancer has gotten through the peer-reviewed cancer research program. Now this portfolio shows where stomach cancer was in just the first 4 years of the program. And what this is really meant to show is that there was a huge unmet and pent-up demand for stomach cancer research funding, and that the peer-reviewed cancer research program has really been able to play a very important role. And I want to highlight one other thing. Some of these cancers have been in the program longer than stomach cancer, and stomach cancer is closer, has exceeded the amount of funding that these cancers have received through the program. Next slide, please. Now, one of the most persuasive arguments for inclusion of stomach cancer in the program is that due to past and present deployments of service members, they and veterans have an increased risk of stomach cancer, especially if they are diagnosed for H. pylori. And I think some of you may know that H. pylori is more prevalent in a lot of the countries that our service members are deployed to, and you know, this is important because H. pylori is a primary identified cause of stomach cancer. Next slide. Now, when we go to Capitol Hill to talk about medical research funding, we can't do that with also not talking about the important role the National Institutes of Health as well as the National Cancer Institute, which is one of the many institutes and centers under the umbrella of the NIH. Next slide. So the good news is that Congress has been very supportive of cancer research, and the budget at the NCI, as you can see here in this table, has gone up year upon year. Next slide. But as a result, and what you'll see here in this graph is that as the budget goes up, so does the demand for research funding. And so that's the good news, bad news sort of situation that we have here. So what you're seeing here in this slide is that that the demand for research from researchers to have their work funded far exceeds the current NCI budget, and that's why we need to go to the Hill and talk to our members of Congress and explain to them how important it is to continue to fund and increase the NCI's budget. Next slide, please. And so while there's been great progress in funding for research through the NCI and a lot of great progress in cancer research overall, that progress is really quite uneven, frankly. And the amount of competition depicted in that slide that I just showed you really deters researchers, and it can deter researchers from going into certain areas of cancer to study. We know that enrollment in clinical trials is still a challenge, and we know that research is resulting in life-saving therapies, and a lot of times this therapy is really expensive and difficult to afford. There are a lot of challenges, but for sure the NCI benefits when the cancer advocacy community comes together and advocates for robust funding levels at the NCI. Next slide, please. So for many years, Debbie's Dream Foundation has been working with Congress to raise the profile of stomach cancer at the National Cancer Institute. And 2 years ago, Congress included report language that directed the NCI to develop a scientific framework to help advance research for stomach cancer, just like they did for pancreatic and lung cancer. And the idea was that if the NCI created the scientific framework, that it would result in more research funding. Next slide, please. So I have some exciting news to share. And some of you may have seen this announcement in the Debbie's Dream Foundation newsletter that went out in December. But in December, we learned that the NCI received approval for a gastric research program from the National Cancer Advisory Board and the Board of Scientific Advisors. And this program is going to be dedicated to the goal of advancing the knowledge of the origins of stomach cancer. And we expect that a request for applications from the NCI will be forthcoming this year. And I just want to be clear on this point that none of this would have happened without your advocacy involvement. This is a huge milestone, and it has the potential to make an enormous difference in the state of stomach cancer research in this country. And it's really why it's so important that Congress continue to increase the NCI's budget so that funding can be available for this stomach cancer research program, and that new discoveries can be expanded upon. Next slide, please. And last year, we built upon the report language from previous years, and really this language is intended to continue to hold NCI's feet to the fire, so to speak. And so you're going to have an opportunity when you have your meetings with your members of Congress and their staff to talk about what is on the horizon at the NCI and how the report language that was supported by Congress is translating into real action at the NCI and hopefully some measurable results. That is the end of my presentation. I hope that this has given you a bit of foundational knowledge and information about these two programs, both being the peer-reviewed cancer research program and research conducted through the National Cancer Institute. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Megan Gordon-Don. She is going to give you the tools that you need to make have an effective meeting with your members of Congress and to get your message across. And I promise you, her slides are going to be so much more interesting than my slides, which are really boring, but she's far better in this than I am. So it's my pleasure to turn the screen over to Megan. Megan, take it away.
Hello, thanks, Camille. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning if you are on the West Coast. I think we're still morning there. So welcome to the virtual Hell Day. For those of you who have done this before, done a Hell Day before, it's going to look a little bit different this year. For those of you who are brand new to Hell Days and to advocacy, you have a special treat that you get. You don't have to schlep to Washington or get through our snow or walk the marble halls and heels and carry a heavy coat. You get to do everything from your nice warm house. And we're going to walk through now all of the messages that we're going to ask you to deliver and take all of that great information that Camille just gave you and distill it down in a way that makes it approachable for you and easy for you to get members of Congress to do what we need them to do. So, as I said, in the past, we have gone up to the Hill and we have sat in offices and met with members of Congress and really had that face-to-face interaction. This year is going to look a little bit different. So we're going to be on a web platform, and we are still going to be meeting with members of Congress and their staff face-to-face, but it's going to be through video calls. And in some cases, you'll have conference calls instead of video calls, and we'll talk about that too. So we've tried really to think through how we make this as easy as possible for all the participants and make it in a way that things can flow and work really well. So every single person is gonna be in a group of people who are gonna go to Hill meetings together or participate in Hill meetings together. So nobody has to do this on their own. And every group is gonna have a group leader. So somebody who has done this before. And those group leaders are going to reach out to you in the next couple of days and set up a call with you. It won't be a super long call. But it's just a pre-meeting to get all your ducks in a row, talk about who's going to do what in the meeting. During the actual meetings, they will kick it off, and they'll help direct flow during the meeting. As a participant, it's really your job to make the connection that you are a constituent, that you have that local geography that makes you a person that that member of Congress really wants to hear your point of view, and you're putting a face on the disease and the need for more research. And to do that, you're going to share your story. So we're going to talk about all those things. So Debbie's Dream has put together a great set of tools for you, all of which are accessible to you from the website that you see above. And it has all of these tools that you can print out and have by your side and look at when you need to. So we've got the ASK printed out. We've got a fact sheet on stomach cancer. We have data on every state incidence and mortality rates so that you can tell the senators or representatives from your state exactly how many people in Alabama were expecting to be diagnosed with stomach cancer this year. We've got a fact sheet that explains why stomach cancer is considered one of the deadliest cancers. We have a list of all the members of Congress who have supported our asks in previous years, so that you can thank them for doing it in previous years. And obviously, if they've done what we asked them to do in previous years, getting them to do the same thing again this year is a little bit easier. We will have a copy of the letter that we are asking representatives and senators to sign, but that's not up quite yet. And we have a chart that shows what the funding levels and how the programs have been set up in the Department of Defense program that we'll be talking more about. But the most important tool is your story, because your story really demonstrates that you are a constituent, that you have that connection with a member of Congress because you live in the area that you represent. Whether you voted for them or not, and this tomorrow or next week is not the time to tell them whether or not you voted for them for the next 2 years if they're your representative, or the next 6 years, or maybe 2 to 6 years, depending on the senator. They are your elected officials. And so our goal is to get our current elected officials to work with us and on the things that we need. So your story is really the most important piece of that, because that makes all of those connections that make the issues that we're talking about real. So I know a lot of the statistics in particular and the science facts about the disease, you may feel a little bit nervous about, you need to memorize those? How are you going to be able to share all that information? The reality is that your story really is the most important part, and you are the expert on your story. I guarantee you know more about stomach cancer than the person that you'll be meeting with for the member of Congress or the staff person, unless they themselves have gone through it. And if they've gone through it, then they will have that connection as well. So again, your story helps make that connection. So just a little bit of a reminder for people, if it's been a while since you've had your government classes or your civics class in high school or middle school. So we have 3 branches of government. The only one that we are talking to next week is the legislative branch, so Congress. So we are not talking to the White House, we're not talking to the Supreme Court, we're only focusing on Congress. And Congress has 2 chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. So everyone, no matter what state you live in, you have 2 senators. And your senators are reelected every 6 years, and it's a rolling 6 years. So if they were just elected or reelected in the last election we just had, then in most cases, unless you're from Georgia or a handful of other states, your senators will be there for another 6 years. And the reason Georgia and some other states are different is because for one reason or another, a senator stepped down during these 6 years that the previous senator was, or that they were elected for. And so somebody was appointed or elected to fill the remainder of their term. So we have elections every 2 years, and every Senate seat comes up for election every 6 years in general. And senators represent the entire state. So those 2 senators equally represent the entire state. So your representatives, you have 1 representative. No matter where you live, you have 1 representative, and your representative is elected or re-elected in every 2-year cycle. And keep in mind that representatives have on average 700,000 constituents. So that is a lot of people that they are trying to get a handle on. What are these people thinking about? What's important to them? What should be my priorities as the representative for this congressional district? And so that's part of why telling your story makes such an impact, because by telling your story, by making that personal connection to it, you're really putting a face on that disease and on our ask, so that they remember you and remember the group that you were with when they're thinking about the things that we need them to think about. So our goals for our congressional visits. Fundamentally, we want Congress to provide more funding for stomach cancer research. So there are 2 different ways that we're going to ask them to do that, 2 different programs that we're going to ask them to focus on. But the overall goal is that we want more funding for stomach cancer research. And we are going to tell them exactly how they can help us. So our message to Congress, this is our official message that's on the ask sheet. Maintain stomach cancer as an eligible cancer for research funding under the Department of Defense's, which we shorten that to DoD, peer-reviewed cancer research program, which is PRCRP, for fiscal year 2022. And in the House, we're going to ask them to sign what's called the Frankel-Kinzinger letter. And we're going to go through all this. And in the Senate, we're going to ask them to sign the Senate letter, and likely that will be led by Senator Hirono. We'll talk about that. Our second ask is fund the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, at $46.11 billion. Yes, I know 46 billion is a lot of money. We're going to talk about it, which is a 3.18 billion increase, or a 7.4 increase over last year. And out of that, provide the National Cancer Institute with a funding level of 7.61 billion. So, and that's when you talk about percentage-wise, that's a commensurate increase. So again, I know that is super wordy, and there's a lot of acronyms in there, but we're going to break all that down. So much simplified. Our revised message is we're going to ask Congress to keep stomach cancer in the DoD's peer-reviewed cancer research program by signing one of 2 letters. Second, provide $46.11 billion to the NIH and provide $7.61 billion to the NCI. That makes it much easier. So the first thing that I want to make sure everyone understands is we are talking about 2 completely separate programs. So if you look at the top of your screen, the National Institutes of Health is located in Bethesda, Maryland. I can actually almost see it from my backyard. And the Department of Defense is actually technically located in Arlington at the Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. And that's where the peer-reviewed cancer research program is. So Department of Defense, National Institutes of Health, 2 very separate buckets, but there is stomach cancer research that's happening in both. And so we are looking for funding increases for both of those programs. And we're going to talk about kind of how those things are different. So again, just kind of bringing this point home. So the way that the appropriations committees, which are the committees in Congress that decide how much funding goes to every single part of our federal budget, deal with this, is that they take every part of the budget, every program that exists, and they break it out into 12 separate pieces of legislation. So there's one bill that just focuses on agriculture or rural development, and for reasons that are extremely complicated, the Food and Drug Administration. There's one for commerce, justice, and science. And then there's a whole bill for defense. And as you can imagine, the defense bill deals with all aspects of our military and the planes that we buy and how we support our troops and all those things. And so one piece of that is the congressionally directed medical research program. And the peer-reviewed cancer research program is part of that. So you can kind of see think of that line, that column, as one bill, and the piece that we're dealing with is a small piece of that overall bill. So then skip over to the right, and you see the labor, HHS, and education column. So that is its own bill, and it's actually one of the biggest bills that the federal government has to deal with every year. So it deals with the Labor Department, Health and Human Services, and the Department of Education. So the part that we're concerned with falls under the Department of Health and Human Services. National Institutes of Health, or NIH, is under that. And then the National Cancer Institute is part of the National Institutes of Health. So you see two separate buildings, two separate bills. These programs really are separate. So thinking again about our message, number one deals with the Department of Defense, and then the bottom two deal with the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. So let's look at the first part of our first message. So we want to keep stomach cancer in the Department of Defense's peer-reviewed cancer research program. So this is an interesting feature of this program. So in so many programs that Congress creates, once it's created, it's there. And often it's there for an eternity. And we find examples all the time of programs that were never taken off the books, even though they maybe the use of it has changed. The peer-reviewed cancer research program is not one of those. The peer-reviewed cancer research program, think of it as it's a blank slate every single year. So they know they're going to have a peer-reviewed cancer research program, but they don't know which cancers are going to be part of that until every year. So even though stomach cancer has been listed as one of those diseases eligible for funding under the peer-reviewed cancer research program since fiscal year 2015, every year we have to keep fighting to get it back on the list. So it was in last year, but this year the Department of Defense Appropriations Subcommittee has their blank slate, and they're waiting to see which cancers they should put in it for this year. So that's our task. And think of it a little bit like a popularity contest. Prom king and queen. It's a little bit like that, and that's why we have these letters that we're asking representatives and senators to sign on to, because we want a letter with a whole bunch of signatures so that those signatures then go to the Appropriations Committee and they say, oh, look at all of these representatives who want stomach cancer included. Okay, we'll include stomach cancer because all these US representatives or all these US senators have said that they support stomach cancer being included for fiscal year 22. So when you're in your meetings, we talked about there are two, Senate, House. So in the Senate, the letter will probably be led by Senator Hirono, who's a Democrat from Hawaii, and she's done it for the last couple of years, and we fully expect that she will do it again, but it's just not solidified yet. So we are expecting that to happen, but for right now, when you're meeting with your Senate offices, you should just say, you should ask them to sign the Senate Senate letter, which we expect to be led by Senator Hirono. And you will actually have copies of the letter that you're going to print out from the website, and you can hold it up during your web call, during your video call, or reference it in your conference call. These also will be provided to the congressional staff that you'll be meeting with, so that they will have copies as well. And so Senate is Senator Hirono, and in the House, we have a different letter, and that letter is being led by Congresswoman Lois Frankel, who's a Democrat from Florida, and Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who's a Republican from Illinois. So again, you see that if your House has one process, Senate has another process, two different groups of representatives or senators are leading each of those letters. And depending if you have a Senate meeting or House meeting, that's when you say which representatives or which senator is leading the letter. So then let's look below the line and look at our National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute ask. So we're asking Congress to provide certain levels of funding for each of these programs. This is the show me the money piece. So in the DoD portion, we're asking Congress to keep stomach cancer in there. Excuse me, they have to start with a blank slate. And we're talking specifically about a stomach cancer being listed. For the NIH and NCI, we're talking about an overall funding level for each of those institutes that will allow stomach cancer research to move forward. So the National Institutes of Health, remember that's the parent organization, if you will. So we're asking for $46.11 billion. And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but you have to remember that the federal government, our budget is trillions. So 46 billion is actually a small part of the overall federal budget. So 46.11 billion for the National Institutes of Health and 7.61 billion for the National Cancer Institute, which is an institute that's part of the National Institutes of Health. So it's not 46.11 billion plus another 7.61 billion. It's 46.11 billion for the National Institutes of Health. And of that, we want 7.61 billion to go to the National Cancer Institute. So when you're making your case, when you're having your Hill meetings, there's kind of an overall structure that we would suggest that you follow. And this is based on years and years of both Camille and I doing these meetings and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't. But you will have your group leaders with you who will help you through this process. And you'll talk through it in your group leader calls before you have your meetings, to walk through who's going to do what piece and how it's all going to go. And you'll be comfortable in what your individual role is after you have those meetings. So the basic structure is introductions, thank yous, make the case, why do we need Congress's help on stomach cancer, then make our asks, and then tell them how we're going to follow up. Because we are the organization that follows up. Because if you don't follow up, then not a lot happens. And this is an organization that does really, really well following up, and we'll tell you how. So again, your group leader is going to tell you which part of the of those roles that they're going to need you to do for each of your meetings. They will kick off the meeting, so everyone's going to get on the meeting a few minutes early. The group leader will welcome the staff or member of Congress when they get on the call or on the video meeting, and then they'll help direct the flow. So you're reading your cues from the group leader. As a participant, your number one goal is to put a constituent face on the disease and make that connection between stomach cancer and what we need them to do. So in a lot of these cases, you're not necessarily going to have time for every person to go through your whole story. So your group leader, again, will tell you kind of how long you have for your story and give you some sense of what you should expect for each meeting. But for your introductions, you're probably just going to have time to say, hi, I'm Megan Gordon-Don from San Antonio, Texas. And that's kind of it at that introductory stage. The group leader might use that initial introduction stage to highlight survivors and constituents, because sometimes you'll be in meetings with people who maybe aren't necessarily a constituent of that particular representative or that particular state. For example, sometimes we have researchers join meetings, and we sometimes put them in additional meetings. So when you're doing your meetings, the next big piece after you get through introductions is you want to thank the people that you're meeting with. And in our case for the Hill meetings, everyone's going to get 2 thank yous. So first, you're going to thank the members of Congress for what they did on the peer-reviewed cancer research program last year or in the past. So there are a lot of new members of Congress, and we get that. But we still have some way to thank everybody. So to see what thank you that you should give each representative or each senator, you should look at that list that I showed you on the website that lists what members of Congress did for the peer-reviewed cancer research program or other programs in the years past. So look and see if the person that you're meeting with, the representative or senator, is on that list. And then thank them if they signed the PRCRP letter previously and ask them to sign again. If they're not on the list, then you can just let the staff or the member of Congress you're meeting with know that we really appreciate that Congress has included stomach cancer in the peer-reviewed cancer research program since 2015. So again, that's thanking Congress as a whole, regardless of whether or not that individual representative or senator was a part of Congress, but that's okay because it's letting them know that there's a history here. There is a longstanding tradition of including stomach cancer, and we're just asking them to get on the train. So our second thank you is, you see from this graph that there has been a nice steady increase of funding for the National Institutes of Health over the last couple of years. And that is due to not only Debbie's Dream advocates, but advocates across the spectrum of all types of medical conditions, because we have all come together when we go to the Hill and we talk about this same funding level for NIH. So as a result, we have been able to get these nice increases for the National Institutes of Health. And that's part of why we're asking for the $46.11 billion this year. But we can thank, just like we're going to thank representatives and senators for signing the letter, we can also thank them for previous increases that they have given to the National Institutes of Health. So thank you for increasing funding for the National Institutes of Health last year, and indeed for the last couple of years. So the next most important part, and again, probably the most important part, is explaining why do we need Congress's help. So remember, members of Congress or their staff may not have a good sense of what stomach cancer is. They may think of cancer as just one disease. And wasn't there a report that just showed that we're making great progress against cancer? So one of your responsibilities is to show them that no, cancer is actually a whole bunch of different diseases. It's actually over 200 different types. And each cancer is in a really different place in terms of the tools that we have available for patients, and what patient survival rates are, and what research there is being done. So we need to explain why we need more research funding for stomach cancer, why we need Congress's help on that. So you can use a few statistics to help. And again, all this information is on those resources that I pointed out. So you can talk about what's going on in your state. So in Texas, there are this many number of people who are going to be diagnosed this year. But based on the statistics that we know, 32% of those people are going to die within 5 years. And stomach cancer is one of the deadliest cancers because their survival rate is below 50%. Keep in mind that the overall 5-year survival rate for all cancers combined is 67%. So when you look at that and you look at stomach cancer survival rate at 32%, you can see obviously there's a discrepancy there, and we need to be working harder for stomach cancer to be able to get the tools that we need to really make a difference in this disease. So again, go back to debbiesdream.org virtual advocacy and pull up all of those resources, print them out, at least read through them so that you know what's available to you. You do not, and you should not, memorize all the statistics and try to just run through all the statistics. When you use more than 2 or 3 statistics in a meeting, oftentimes staff just kind of stop paying attention. And one of the ways that you can really get them to understand and make that connection with the disease is to tell your story. So that gets to you focusing on why you're participating in the virtual Hill Day and how more research will help you. So think about your story and think about how you phrase it in that way, because you both want to make it personal and make it memorable for the person that you're meeting with, but you also want to connect it to the asks and explain why we need more research for stomach cancer. So the picture on the right is my mother and I. And my mother, if I was telling my story, I would talk about the fact that my mother, who's a survivor of AAA negative breast cancer and tongue cancer, has H. pylori and had stomach polyps removed recently. So she is at high risk of yet another cancer, stomach cancer. And as her daughter, that obviously makes me very nervous for lots of reasons, and is one of the reasons that I consider it personally important that I work with all of you, but also why I constantly am on the lookout for what's happening in stomach cancer research, and why I know that we need Congress's help to really make a difference in this disease. So when you're telling your story during your virtual meetings, obviously you want to make sure that you've given them your name. You want to talk about your geography. So my mother lives in San Antonio, Texas, and connect that. You want to connect your story to the need for more research. So explaining why we don't have that many tools right now. So if she turns out to have stomach cancer down the road, there's not a lot that we're able to give to her. And that's her daughter, and you know, obviously that's concern for me and concern for my children. You want to have several versions of your story ready. So your group leader will give you a cue as for which one you should tell. You're not going to have time to get into a 5 or 10 minute version of your story in most cases. Usually it's a 4 to 5 second version that is one version you should have ready. That, for example, I'm here because my mother is at high risk for stomach cancer. A short story, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 or 2 minutes, it expands on that a little bit more. And then a longer story, if your story is really the one that is going to be used as the highlight for that particular meeting, maybe you're the constituent for that meeting, or maybe your group leader feels that your story will be best suited for a particular part of the ask, then you want to have a longer version of it too that really explains in a little more detail. But the key is really to make it memorable. So to talk about something, you know, you remember the day that your mother was diagnosed, or that you were waiting for your surgery, or how you felt when your grandchild was born, and connect those dots for the people that you're meeting with. Make them see it. And it's okay to have a picture. In fact, we encourage you to have a picture of whatever picture captures that moment that you can share during your video call. So we want to tell them why we need more research funding, and then we want to tell them how they can help us with that. So our first ask, we want to tell them that we want to keep stomach cancer in the Department of Defense's peer-reviewed cancer research program by either signing the House letter if they're a US representative, which is being led by Congresswoman Frankel and Congressman Kinzinger, or if you're talking to a senator, we want to ask them to sign the Senate letter. So a few key facts that Camille mentioned that might be helpful when you're talking about the peer-reviewed cancer research program. The first is that the Department of Veterans Affairs has listed stomach cancer as a disease with a presumed military service connection. That's really critical because one of the key parts of the peer-reviewed cancer research program is that there has to be some kind of connection between the research and military service. So the fact that the Department of Veterans Affairs has already said, yep, there's a connection between stomach cancer and military service, that checks that box, and that's really important for this program. The other piece that's really important that your members of Congress should know is that US military and veterans may have an increased risk of stomach cancer, particularly those who have served overseas and are at risk for H. pylori. So our second ask is we want to provide, this is where we focus on NIH and NCI, we want Congress to provide $46.11 billion for the NIH and $7.61 billion for the National Cancer Institute. So again, two different numbers that are related, NIH 46.11, NCI 7.61. If we were in person and all of you were in front of me, I would have one side shout 46.11, the other side shout 76.7.61, and we'd see who is louder. You can practice that at home with your kids or family and make sure you have those numbers. But again, you'll have the ask sheet in front of you that has those numbers printed. So we talk about stomach cancer as one of the deadliest cancers. Deadliest cancers are defined as a cancer with a 5-year survival rate below 50%. And that's actually in a piece of legislation called the Recalcitrant Cancer Research Act, that definition. And you see that stomach cancer is listed as one of those deadliest cancers. I want to point out this chart is actually from last year. I haven't had a chance to update it yet. So it's not part of your materials, but you have some other materials that you do have. Because you will see this listed in your materials as well, the facts about deadliest cancers are put together by the Deadliest Cancers Coalition, and Debbie's Dream Foundation is one of the members of that coalition. So some of the other reasons that your member of Congress might find interesting about why we need more funding for stomach cancer research at the NIH and NCI is obviously COVID has had an impact on research. There was a study done that looked at the decline in diagnosis of 6 common cancers, and stomach cancer is one of those, due to skip medical visits during the pandemic. And I believe that it only went up to May, so not the full pandemic as we've had it so far. So just up until that point, there was a 46% decline in the diagnosis of stomach cancer and those other cancers. Clearly, we know that that's not because there were fewer cancers out there. That's because people aren't going to medical visits and getting the tests that they need. So this is going to mean that we're going to see, as we come out of this pandemic, that there's going to be a lot more people that we may be catching later because of this delay. The other really important piece is that clinical trials have shut down or have been delayed. And so as a result, all those clinical trials that were focusing on new treatments for stomach cancer and other cancers are going to be delayed. And in some cases, in many of the cases, a lot of the research will have to be started over because just by the nature of research. So that's also going to cause some issues. So if you have participated in a clinical trial that's been impacted by COVID, it's a great opportunity to share that story as part of your meeting and explain why we need that increased funding for NIH for all the other reasons, but also because it's going to take a lot to get this research restarted. And this is just showing clinical trial accrual. So if you look at the 2019 line that goes all the way out to December, it started going down when we, probably partially due to holidays and all that kind of stuff. Started 2020, it was mirroring where we were, and then it crashed, and right about March, April. And that's when the pandemic hit, and we are nowhere close to making up those accrual numbers. So Democrats and Republicans may not agree on a whole lot, but they do agree on the importance of NIH funding. So we really have had a lot of bipartisan support for increasing funding for NIH and NCI. Camille talked about a different version of this, but this is again just showing that there is a lot of interest in cancer research as a whole that's not getting funded right now. And some of that research we know is stomach cancer. So one of the reasons we need more funding for NCI and for NIH is because of that new NCI gastric research program that Camille talked about. We need that program to take off. And for that program to take off and really be successful, we need to make sure that NIH and NCI has the funding that it needs. So it's critical to keep up the momentum for NCI and for NIH. So I wish I could tell you that every single meeting is going to be perfect and you're going to say, this is what we want. And they're going to say, yes, absolutely, sign me on. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way. In most cases, you're going to have staff or members of Congress who are going to say, I'll take that back, let me consider it, and I'll let you know what we decide to do. We're going to talk about how you follow up with that. But there are going to be some cases where people push back a little bit. And so some of the most common pushback that we think you're going to hear is that there shouldn't necessarily be funding medical research through the Department of Defense and the NIH. And the reality is that these are two totally separate programs with different goals. So the Department of Defense looks at, has a very different mindset. They research and do what they're supposed to do. They have orders and they follow orders. So stomach cancer is listed in the program. They are going to fund stomach cancer research. They're going to fund the best stomach cancer research they can find. And their focus is really on high risk, high reward research. NIH and NCI are a little bit different. They look at it as their goal is to fund the best science, regardless of where that science is coming from and regardless of what diseases that science is focused on. So when there is decreased funding, then there's increased competition for the limited dollars. And so they tend to focus more on the safer research projects. So safer research projects are those that have more data. So think breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer. Stomach cancer as a deadliest cancer, there's just been less research there. So they're just two different approaches. So you may also hear that we don't sign letters requesting funding levels. Well, good news. We're not asking for a specific funding level for the peer-reviewed cancer research program. We are asking for a specific funding level for the NIH and NCI, but there is no sign-on letter for that. It's just, please support this. the sign-on letters do not have specific funding levels. You might, if you're meeting with a member of the Appropriations Committee, they may not sign on to the sign-on letters on the peer-reviewed cancer research program. That's just kind of a custom. So you can let them know that's okay that they're not going to do that if they're a member of the Appropriations Committee. But then say, okay, if you can't do that, what can you do? And the reality is that they can submit what's called a database request that says that including stomach cancer in the peer-reviewed cancer research program is something that's important to them as a representative. And that option is available to anyone, including members of the Appropriations Committee. And an example of how you do a database request is also on the website. We don't send on to disease-specific requests. The reality is that the peer-reviewed cancer research program is a program for many different types of cancer, and stomach cancer has been a part of it since 2015. So this isn't really the same as a disease-specific, because the peer-reviewed cancer research program is a big program for many different cancers. We just want to make sure stomach cancer continues to be included. DoD should only be funding research that's directly related to combat veterans. We know that H. pylori remains the leading risk factor for stomach cancer, and military service members who've served abroad have a high risk of becoming H. pylori positive. And as I mentioned, the Department of Veterans Affairs has already said that there's a connection. So this one should be checked. Congress has made NIH a priority for a while now. It's time to focus on something else. There's a reality, the reality is that there are a lot of diseases out there that need better treatments and early detection tools. We appreciate the past increases that they've given for NIH. Stomach cancer has a 5-year survival rate of just 32%. So we need those increases for NIH and NCI so that we can keep up the momentum. And another version of that, they can't afford to provide another significant increase for NIH. The reality is that Congress has found ways and continues to find ways to fund the things that are priorities. And so we are asking them to continue to make stomach cancer and cancer research a priority. So you may have some members of Congress who say kind of some things like, I've always supported this, or they may not give you a real answer. Some may even take a picture of your video screen, you know, of all the people. It's important that you come back and tell them, you know, we appreciate your pastor support. We appreciate that you said you'll support this when it comes to the floor, but what can you do for us now to help make sure that we get stomach cancer in the peer-reviewed cancer research program, and don't let them off the hook. So remember, you're the constituent. Members of Congress work for you. You're the expert in your story. And so you're gonna focus on your story and make your members of Congress remember you. So we're talking about follow-up. A couple of things that you can do. So first of all, within a week of your meeting, you should email the staff that you met with. And if they said, I'm gonna talk to the boss about the getting him to sign back on to the peer-reviewed cancer research program, ask them, did you talk to the boss? Are you gonna sign on to the peer-reviewed cancer research program? We have Hill Visit report forms. So we're gonna ask that you email those to Nicole at the email provided there. Someone should take notes during your meeting. Your group leader will assign that task so that you can let us know how they went and what follow-up needs to be done. We don't expect you to know the answer to every question. That's why Camille is here. I'm here, DDF staff is there. If there are questions that come up that you don't know the answer to, all you have to say is that we will get back to you, make a note of it and let us know, and we will follow up with them. And then of course, social media is always appreciated. So a few tips for your meetings. You want to stay on message. You may be very concerned about the vaccine rollout or other issues, but your meetings, your virtual Hill Day meetings are not the time to go through those asks. Respectful give and take is a good thing that allows you to build a conversation with the people you're meeting with. If you can't change their mind on something if they give you a hard no on something and you can't change their mind on that, then work to find some other area that you might be able to leave the door open. So if they say no, they're not going to sign on to the peer-reviewed cancer research program letter. Okay, will they support increasing funding for NIH and then continue to follow up with them? Treat congressional staff with respect and remember that your story is a potent reminder, a potent help tool. A couple of reminders. So sign on to your meeting a few minutes early, find a quiet place, make sure your earphones, device, everything are charged and working. Have all your materials printed and nearby. And you want to make sure that you have on video ready. This is casual. Some of your meetings may be conference calls, some of them may be video meetings. They may change back and forth. So you can wear your bunny slippers, but please make sure you wear pants. So a couple of next steps. Your group leader will be reaching out to you on email to set up a call with your group sometime between tomorrow and February 8th. You'll also be receiving your draft schedule via email, as well as a group roster and some other information. So it's a draft schedule because we expect things to change. So you will get an updated schedule as we get closer. But for right now, we want you to look at that draft schedule and let us know if you have conflicts. As a reminder, the Hill Day is February 11th. So if you now are scheduled to have 5 conference calls and you can't change those, let us know so that we can take care of rescheduling the meetings if we have to. And you obviously check out the online resources that we've been talking about. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole to go over the platform that we're using. Nicole, are you there?
There we go. You can keep the slides if you want, Megan. You want to keep the slides? Yeah. All right. So our virtual meetings, everything that we're doing is going to be using Google Meet. So you don't have to download an app. You don't have to do any of that. What's going to happen is you're going to be emailed a calendar invite that'll have each of your meetings individually. So if you have one at 10:30, one at 12, and then one at 1, you will get 3 separate calendar invites, okay? So we ask that you accept those, and they'll also have the information for the login for your meeting as well as a call-in number. So if you have a technology problem or the weather's really bad and you can't get an internet connection, whatever the case may be, you don't need to worry because you will have a call-in number as well, okay? As Megan just said, that first email will be a draft or a tentative schedule. So realize that you're going to get those probably by the end of this week, but prior to basically the day before our meetings, unfortunately, those could possibly change a little bit. And that's not really due to us, it's usually due to the congressional offices having some kind of conflict. The final, like I said, the final schedule will be emailed with, I put 72 hours, that is our goal, but know that it could be 32, a day or two ahead. If you have any computer or technical issues, again, please feel free to utilize that call-in option. Megan, next slide, please. Okay, and to access, as she has spoken many times and said, to access all the documents, there is the link for you guys to do so. If I know one of the questions was, normally if you've ever gone to the Hill, we go with these folders and we give these folders to the offices. You don't need to be concerned about that because that's something that there is going to be emailed to them. Also, in addition, you can always forward them to our website because on our website, on that same page, that the link that you're looking at, it says for congressional offices. All they have to do is click on that and it'll bring them to the documentation that you're going to be talking about and that you may be showing them. Next is questions. So I just answered one question with regards to the folders that we typically do, and that obviously we don't need it. This video will obviously be on that webpage. It actually says watch a training video or a meeting video, and this will be there within 24 hours of now. So you guys can always rewatch this and feel free to do that. Any other questions that people have? I'm looking here in the question. If you guys have any questions on the right hand side, that's where it says questions, and feel free to type them in. Let me see if I see any more. There's a question here. Are you providing us a guide for the day of? Just curious if we need to be making one while watching this video. You guys want to answer that?
Sure. So that website that Nicole and Megan were talking about, that has all the resources, you're going to see a link there that says cheat sheet. And that cheat sheet is a helpful tool for thinking through how your meetings and preparing for your meetings, how they're going to go. And it'll reference, that cheat sheet references some of the other documents that you should be consulting to be prepared for your meetings. And as we said before, you're going to get a schedule, and the schedule is going to tell you what time your meetings start, and that will frame your day. Anything else, Megan?
No, I think so. They're really, between your group leader and that cheat sheet, your group leader is going to walk you through all the different roles of the meeting that we've talked about. And so you're going to have a sense of this is what your part needs to be. And, you know, the first meeting may take a little bit of just kind of feeling it out. But by the time you get to your second, third meeting, you will have it down. So it'll be okay. And you have anything you need to reference is accessible.
Also, someone mentioned one of our previous people that have taken part in this in the past. They said it might be a good idea to mention that to a lot of your new people that joining in, some of the Congress people are in the Appropriations Committee, so they can't sign the letter. But what they can do is they can look for stomach cancer inclusion. So that's something that I know that we really didn't mention, but that was a good point that someone brought up. So I thought I might want to throw that in there. Let's see, what else did people ask? Give me a second.
Yeah, so while you're looking, Nicole, so the database request that I talked about is the way that a member of the Appropriations Committee, or really any member of Congress, any representative, they actually go in and fill out a form on the U.S. House of Representatives kind of internal website and say that they support including stomach cancer in the peer-reviewed cancer research program. And so filling out that database request is something that any member of Congress can do. And in fact, all members of Congress fill out those forms for something. We just want them to add stomach cancer and getting it in the PRCRP again as one of the things that they're asking for.
Another question that just came in is, when will we receive the emails for non-leader participants? Again, you will have, we're hoping actually by Friday of this week, you will receive your first tentative schedule. And then you will receive the other one, the complete final, as we like to call it. We're saying 2 to 3 days prior to your meeting. We will get them to you as soon as we possibly can. It's really the offices that have to confirm so that we can get those to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And just to build on that, everyone should expect to get an email here about the next 24 hours. And that email will include everybody who's in your group. It'll let you know who the leader is for your group, who will be organizing that preparatory call before February 11th. So you can do some role playing and make sure everyone's comfortable in the group dynamic. And you will get a draft schedule for your Hill meetings. And not only do we want to give you the draft meeting schedule so you can make sure that you don't have any conflicts. I think that most of you knew to set aside the day for these meetings, but also it gives you an opportunity to do a little bit of Googling, right? So maybe you're not so familiar with somebody that you're meeting with. So spend some time doing a little bit of research about the members of Congress that you're going to be meeting with.
You will, a question came in asking if they're going to hear from their team leaders in the next few days. Yes, that is the idea, that we have that, so that it becomes a lot easier for you to ask. And again, my email at events@debbiesdream.org is always available to you. It will be on the emails that are sent to you, as well as my cellular number, as well as the DDF office number for day of, if there's any major glitches or problems or things that occur. And obviously everyone typically has Camille's as well. So they will be able to, the copies of, and someone else is asking about the copies of the stories. So the stories that you guys have submitted or were asked to submit by yesterday, if you have submitted them or if we have yours from last year, those will be on the website. They are not there right now, obviously, because they are being read and made sure that they're grammatically correct. And they will go up there by state. They will be there listed by state and then by alphabetical order thereafter. So if you have presented it to us, then the answer is yes to that question. It will be on the website that they're able to see. That was a question for us. Let me see. How long will the meetings last? Each meeting. That's, you guys can answer that.
So it will range between 15 minutes, sometimes longer. I think the shortest that I've seen is 5 to 10 minutes. And you know, but sometimes they can go for an hour if there's a good exchange and you know, the member of Congress or staff is really engaged and neither side has something that's conflicting that's set up. So you know, we try to give you some cushion time in between your meetings, but sometimes those are set somewhat close together. So your group leader and you as participants will need to keep an eye on the clock a little bit to make sure that you're giving yourself at least 5 minutes between each meeting to sign off one and start the next.
I just want to say one other thing about the meetings. I know that Nicole walked through the fact that you would be getting that we're setting up Google Calendar invites for your meetings. There are some congressional offices who prefer to use their own meeting platform, whether that's just a conference line or it might be Zoom or another platform. In cases where the congressional office has selected what platform you guys are going to use to hold that meeting, that will be on your calendar, on your meeting schedule. So it'll be really important for you to take a close look at your schedule to know which number or link you need to call or click on to have that meeting. And again, that will be delineated on your meeting schedule, not the tentative one that you get, but the final one that you get will have all of that information. So you will want to take a close look at your meeting itinerary to know how you're going to be participating in that particular meeting. Okay.
Thank you for that, Camille. I was going to mention that. Thank you. Let me see. Any other questions that we haven't answered yet? We have actually answered all the questions that I see thus far. Is there anyone else who has any questions? And again, if anyone thinks of any questions that they have, they can obviously feel free to email me. If in fact I don't know the answer, then I will get it to Camille and or Megan, and they will be able to, I'm sure, answer it for you. But I think we actually have answered every single question, which is great. Let's make sure.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us and sticking with us through the training.
You guys are going to do great.
And we will be sending you some videos, and we will be sending you some really fun materials also to look at from DDF, as we have had a constituent out of Michigan who has been kind enough to actually do a video and talk about, she actually obviously is on the Hill at times, but she is also a stomach cancer survivor. It was a pleasure having her join us last year. But she actually did kind of a video to show new people kind of how not to be afraid and not to be concerned about meeting with congressional offices, because we all know it can be a little bit intimidating at times, just because. And so this way, it might actually bring everyone down a little bit and everybody feel a little bit more comfortable. So I think that is all that we have for now. Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys. We'll see you on the Hill. We'll be hearing from us. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.